Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we say goodbye to the incredible 2024 New York Mets. We look back on the memes, our preseason predictions, and of course, we answer your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. Yeah, there it is. Just do that one time. Our homemade intro. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today and subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, drop us a mailbag question with that review. You can watch us on YouTube and also ask mailbag questions in the comments section under the show there as well. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And you could even hear the little frog in my throat, Joe, as we play the tiny violins on the Titanic right now. The wild ride is over. I think there's no other way to open this than, what was your initial feel when the season ended, Joe? Because I think there's a lot to unpack here for us, but I thought not only this rendition of the Mets, but any team I root for, or any team anybody that listens to this show root for, the ending of this, because of how crazy the ride was, felt oddly different than anything else.
I think I was just as disappointed as I was in 22 and 2015 in the moment, because this felt like, I hate to say like the team of destiny and the Magic team, because the reality is none of that is real, or my opinion, none of that is real. Just real disappointed because they got this close. And we're gonna look ahead a little bit, and we certainly have off-season shows every week. The Mets Pod will not stop. We'll be covering everything. We'll all the way through the off-season into spring training and beyond. But you just never know when you're going to get back to this place. The Mets could have a fantastic off-season, maybe have a better team on paper, win more baseball games next year during the regular season. Heck, maybe win the National League East. And you could just falter in the divisional round to whoever this year's version of the Mets is. You don't know. So real disappointed that they fell short. But despite that disappointment, I was relatively quickly able to turn that into just how proud I was of this team as a fan, just proud of what they went through and kind of, just what they became. They became a legitimate baseball team that we're going to talk about the memes and the gimmicks and everything that went along with this season. But I want to make sure people remember, despite it ending, which at its core in sports, there's one fan base a year that gets to be truly happy. It's not like that's just the way it works. I want people to remember how good this Mets team really was. It wasn't just grimace, or it wasn't just OMG. This was a collection of players that came together for, frankly, a 4-month span to be the best team in baseball. That's something that shouldn't be overlooked, but disappointed and proud.
That's a really good way of putting it. I think we feel a little different initially, although you were a little bit more down, and for me, it's in thirds, and 1/3 of it is completely with you, where you got to face reality. It is really hard to get to the point of the year where you are 6 wins away from being world champions. It's hard to get back there no matter what. And I think I learned that the hard way as an adult after 2015. When 06 happened, obviously it's incredible how disappointing the years were after that. But I was still a kid rooting for the team. And then in 2015, you really learn, like, man, a lot can go wrong real quickly. But this is where the other 2/3 comes into play. And 1/3 of that being that I think this will be different than 06 and 15, because the Mets finally, as an organization, have the right people in place from the top down. And that starts with the financial muscle and mind of Steve Cohen, because at some point, Steve Cohen deserves more credit than just being a guy with money. Steve Cohen is a guy with money that here's a little hint for everybody, by the way. I know Steve Cohen has more money than other owners in sports, but every owner in sports is a very, very wealthy human being. And how they choose to use those resources is a different story. And how Steve Cohen has used his resources is he went out and got the best of the best in David Stearns. And the trickle effect of getting David Stearns is he got the best of the best of guys that are due to be managers, and that was Mendoza. And then besides that, the amount of money they pumped into sports science, nutrition, training staff, facilities, pitching lab, on and on and on it goes. That's the third of it where I feel really optimistic, not only about next year, but about the future. And then the final third of it is this team, as you hinted at, Joe, gave us so many unique memories where I remember sitting there in May and I was looking at things as a huge hockey fan. And I'm like, man, I'm going to be down and out more than ever if the Rangers get bounced this year. Obviously, because I thought they could have won the cup. But another part of me is it's always about carrying to the next season. And I thought for the first time in a while, I'm like, the Mets aren't even going to give us life this summer. And that hurts. It hurts to be not checked out because we do this show every week. Like we always joke around. We've done this show during far, far worse times than how this season even started. But you just look at it and go, man, I would like them to at least be interesting for the beginning of summer and give us some interesting topics that aren't who can we trade at the deadline in the middle of May. And they did so much more of that. So many incredible memories, whether it's walk-offs, big moments of stars here. Pete Alonso saving his best for the end. We'll get into Mark Vientos today. Francisco Lindor. I mean, maybe one of the most important parts of this entire season is that Lindor's comfort level in New York right now as a superstar has gone to a place that you always dreamed of when they traded for him. But I don't even know if people expected that ceiling when he was traded for, where he was, let's be real, the runner-up as the most valuable player in the National League. So there's just so much that transpired this year. And I swallowed this season ending better than most that make it this far. And maybe that is a little blind optimism because so much can go wrong. Like, look at what went wrong for the Braves this year. The Braves probably can't believe that how their season transpired with injuries and, they came up short. But there's just so many reasons to be optimistic about the future now, Joe. And it's weird. When a season ends, you usually lose a little life, right? And then you need 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even a month to gather yourself to get excited about the offseason, and then you move on to the excitement and optimism of spring training. I never even had that that week down period or 2-day down period here where I'm just like, let's keep building this thing. Let's get right, and let's get back to the NLCS, and this time get over the hump and make a World Series, because I think the Mets could do it.
To be clear, the emotions I spoke of were when they got eliminated that night. The next day, my mind flips. I feel like in another life, I may have been a general manager of a baseball team because the season ended, disappointing. The next day, I'm not making the decisions. I am just armchair GMing. Like, how can I get the Mets back here? So I'm instantly flipped to what's going to happen in the offseason. And, like I said, we have plenty of shows to do that, and we'll get into it. But you look at $180 million coming off of the payroll. Doesn't mean the Mets necessarily will or won't. I have no idea what their plans are to reinvest all of the money that came off the payroll. But what it ultimately means is you have the best or one of the best executives in this sport, and you say to him, you can do whatever you want this offseason. There's no payroll number. There's nothing that stops him from doing any type of move he sees fit to get the Mets to the next level. And when I look at, as you mentioned, between Stearns and Carlos Mendoza, who, there's been plenty of managers that had good first years and fell off or whatever, but everything about Mendoza feels like this is the long-term guy. So I feel for the first time in a long time that the Mets are set up for that level of sustained success because they have the infrastructure in place to get there. And that is the optimistic side of me. That is I think, what, frankly, a lot of Mets fans are feeling. I'm on Twitter more than I need to be or should be. And I thought it would be a terrible experience on that platform over the last couple of days. And of course, the night of, everyone's upset and angry or sad or whatever they were feeling. And that's normal. But very quickly, I've seen a lot of people in my mentions. I've seen a lot of people in my feed. There's a lot of optimism. And I think that's just what this infrastructure has set up for the fans. They've given the Mets fans hope that this is not a one-time deal. This is not a fluke. This is something that is turning into something bigger.
I completely agree. You're right. It was interesting to see the reaction, how people were rejuvenated in a way for the future now, where there's big expectations this offseason. There's excitement around players that we know will be here. It's not just that fear of, man, are we going to lose this guy? How are we going to replace this guy? And those conversations are going to happen. And for full transparency today, Joe and I are not doing our full offseason blueprint preview. We are, saying goodbye to the 2024 Mets and looking back and laughing at some of our predictions and some of the great memories. And, we do this podcast every week. So starting next week is where it's going to be full blown deep diving into ways.
Just so you guys know, I'm already texting Connor trade ideas, people that I want to see the Mets trade for. So, behind the scenes, we're developing our offseason.
We're in the lab.
We're ready.
Yeah, we're in the lab. We're just not ready to do the whole sales pitch to the entire world yet. We need one more week to do that.
Yeah.
So let's briefly just recap the NLCS, Joe, because I think people are trying to kind of point to, what went wrong. And I had a couple different viewpoints. One being that the Dodgers are an absolute unit, and that's where you want the Mets to get to. And you look at that lineup, it's unbelievable. And it's not just Ohtani at the top, despite the fact that broadcast kind of shoves that narrative down your throat over and over again. Mookie Betts is an incredible baseball player. Freddie Freeman on one leg is still making things happen. Obviously Teoscar had a big year for them, and he came alive when they needed him at the end of the series after a tough start. But then when you drop low-cost acquisitions around star players like that, you get the Tommy Edmonds of the world that are just in the perfect scenario to succeed, and they come up with big hits. And to be fair, while the Mets don't have the star talent of the Dodgers, the Mets have stars. And we saw guys like Jose Iglesias get dropped into a great situation with the Mets and run with it at times. We saw Jesse Winker, who was having a good year with the Nationals, but his major league career was on life support a little bit if you turn back the clock a year ago. And credit to Jesse, who had a great year with the Nationals and parlayed it into being a deadline acquisition and had a great run with the Mets so far. So the Dodgers are kind of the pinnacle example of the infrastructure they've set up with their lineup sets up the low-cost acquisitions to have success on top of the stars. And then also, Joe, even though they're short-handed in their starting rotation, and they weren't to start the year, they had a lot of arms. They've just had a lot of arms go down. Their tactics of how to use them, their depth of the bullpen, and the Mets hit in this series. They left a lot of guys on base, but they also did score runs. It's not like they didn't. It just goes to show you when you are that loaded offensively that there wasn't an answer to me for the Mets this year. I saw some people being like, that's what happens when you don't get arms at the deadline. And to be honest with you, I can't play the hindsight game, because I sat here on this podcast and said, David Stearns better not trade a top 5 prospect for a high leverage reliever this season. Let's see if we can get some low cost guys. And Stanek had huge moments for this team down the stretch. Maton fell apart in the playoffs, but Maton was a big reason that they got there. Okay. Let's not completely overlook that entire thing. And at the end of the day, sometimes you could sit there and say the Dodgers were better equipped, because the reality is the Dodgers have been building this way for much longer than the Mets, but the Mets have the blueprint right in front of them of not only where they want to go, but who they want to be.
When you look at the NLCS, I know there's a lot of, he should have played Jesse Winker in game 3 and game 4. And sure,
it doesn't win them the series.
And the Dodgers scored like 10 and 9 runs.
The games
were
not close, Joe.
Games.
The games were not close.
It doesn't make a difference. The Mets had a fantastic season. Them coming back against Milwaukee the way they did with the dramatic home run by Pete. Them taking care of business with the Phillies and having Lindor hit the grand slam the way he did. The Mets just met their match with the Dodgers. And sometimes it is somewhat that simple. Look, the Dodgers set a postseason record for the most runs scored in a postseason series ever. That's a record that they set in the series. And sure, you can, in a way, point that to the Mets didn't have enough pitching, and they didn't have enough pitching. And is that a cause of the trade deadline? Sure. Could they have parted with, I don't know, Ryan Clifford and more to get Tanner Scott? Yeah, they could have, but I don't think there was a lot of people that really wanted that to be the case when you were at the trade deadline. Heck, there was a lot of people that were saying the Mets shouldn't even buy at the trade deadline because they're not good enough. They should either sell, take. How many people said take advantage of the market, Connor? How many people did I see in my mentions saying, yeah, they're playing pretty good, but you could get for Sean Manaea, you could get for Luis Severino. Let's set this up for the long term. They were short on pitching. There's no way around it. And the pitchers that they did have, despite the good seasons that they had, they ran out of gas. Sean Manaea ran out of gas in the NLCS, and that should be almost expected. He threw 117 innings in 2023, and when you combine the regular season and the playoffs, he threw 200 innings this year for the Mets. So you don't really go up 80 innings and just maintain everything. Luis Severino almost threw as many innings this year as he threw 2019 through 2023 combined. Like, the Mets deserve credit for getting those pitchers here to be healthy, to be able to contribute in these series, but they were gassed. That's what it comes down to. The Mets scored runs. They just didn't score enough runs, and they met their match in the National League Championship Series. And, as you said, Connor, the Dodgers are the blueprint. The Mets literally saw what they need to conquer. So they know what they have to do, and they take it from here. And, not to really talk or care much about the World Series, I think the Dodgers are winning the World Series. I think they're a better team than the Yankees are. So the Mets ran into a juggernaut type of team that played to the back of their baseball card, the potential, everything that they have. Very difficult series. I don't have too many things that I look at and I go, the Mets cost themselves in the series by making this decision or that decision. It was just, they got beat. They just got straight up beat.
I'm with you. Maybe that's why I was able to kind of handle the loss a lot better than normal, where you look at it and the games weren't close. And when I say that, I'm not making fun of the Mets. The Mets won their 2 games pretty decisively, honestly. Yeah. So it was the entirety of the series wasn't very close. And I think that sometimes you got to tip your cap. I mean, a lot of guys crumble in the moment. Ohtani and Betts, and I mean, yes, there was some heroes like Tommy Edman, but
Max Muncy reached 13 straight plate appearances or something like that.
They lived up to the moment. And the reality is too that they've been there enough, not Ohtani, but the rest of them have been there enough where the lights weren't too bright. And now for the Mets, say we fast forward the clock and the Mets are here again a year from now. We'll fast forward it 11 months and say the playoffs are starting. Yeah. I have no doubt in Francisco Lindor and Mark Vientos and Pete Alonso to perform. The Mets had a real stink of a narrative coming into the playoffs that because of 2022, these guys can't get it done. And shout out to Steve Gelbs, who had a great, breakdown during a game of why this team is different. And at the time, some people were like, well, are they actually, it was going into the Atlanta series, and are they actually different? And every time the Mets answered the bell, Atlanta, Milwaukee, the Phillies, and they fought till the last out against the Dodgers. They just ran out of gas, Joe. It happens. Yep. The pitching ran out of gas, and they didn't go down like suckers. They didn't go out sad. They just ran into a juggernaut. I agree with you. I'm I usually, full transparency, as a baseball fan, I'm not always excited for the World Series. And I can't say that about other sports. Like, I'm always really excited for the Super Bowl. I'm always really excited for the Stanley Cup and the NBA Finals. The World Series can really go one of 2 ways for me, because sometimes I feel so disconnected from the teams in it, but I am beyond excited for this World Series. I wish the Mets were in it, but if they're not, This does feel like a matchup of, you have mega stars on both sides, but I'm just fascinated by the actual tactics of the matchup of how well the Dodgers spit at bad pitches and how the Yankees try to strategize around it.
Hey, Connor, we saw the movie trailer since the Wild Card series. They were playing the commercial every other inning about the MLB postseason, and the only people that were in the commercial were Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge. But look,
Scripted.
when you get the,
Kidding. I'm not a
interestingly
conspiracy
enough,
theorist.
there are people that probably
I
believe
know.
that. But it is probably it's a good thing for the sport of baseball to have the two biggest stars on the biggest stage. I totally understand, and that's why they did that. But I think it's a true heavyweight fight. Like so often when you go World Series by World Series, there's always that underdog versus the better team, or maybe in the case of 2023, in a way, almost two underdogs in the Rangers and the Diamondbacks. But generally, year over year, it's like one really awesome team in one league and then one kind of surprise team in the other league meet in the World Series. This is probably the situation where the best team from the American League is facing the best team from the National League, and they happen to have the two biggest, or maybe three biggest stars, if you want to say Juan Soto is the third biggest star, but certainly two of the top 4 to 5 biggest stars in the entire sport playing. So I am very interested to watch the series.
Okay, so let's have a little fun here. We're not going to go through every single meme, like breakdown of what transpired, but out of all of the memes, the gimmicks, the things that kept this 2024 Mets so fun, Joe, what was your favorite between Seymour Wiener, respect to the troops, Rally Pimp, Max Wiener, Grimace, OMG, Glizzy Iggy, the Playoff Pumpkin, and then the Temptations? And don't forget, your favorite one, the Rizzler, was there when we needed him most in Game 5.
Didn't know who that was
So
exactly.
he's not your pick, it appears.
Yeah, so the Rizzler isn't my pick, and I mean, I'll tell you this, Connor. I enjoyed all of the gimmicks this year. I thought it was fun. I felt like they needed fun because just the way the roster was.
You gotta hold on to something.
I'll tell you, I'm gimmicked out for I've had enough. There's enough gimmicks in 2024 that I don't need one for next year or the year after. We could take a couple years off of major gimmicks.
Watch your words. You might need one in June.
I trust that I won't. But I will pick OMG. And the reason I will is because I think that song is now saved in my phone. And if I want to think about the 2024 Mets, I just put on OMG and it'll bring up the memories and I'll think of this team. I'm not particularly going to be spending a ton of time thinking about Grimace, Seymour Wiener and the Rally Pimp and Glizzy Iggy and everything else. Like, they were fun mascots and kind of helped mold the story of this team. But OMG is the one thing that I think would stick. You had the sign for the home runs. That's the one I think that kind of will stick and always bring 2024 back in my mind.
I think it was the one that the team really attached themselves to. And I know that's stating the obvious because it was Jose Iglesias' song. But they didn't all have to embrace it like that. They loved every set with the sign, the picture after the home runs. That was the one that unified the team the most. My personal favorite, I just always think of the rain during Mets Yankees and the giant Grimace on the City Shea Bridge. Yep. That Grimace, to me, the variance of Grimace is why Grimace is my favorite, because you had the actual Grimace come out and throw the first pitch to Vito, and then you would just have random Grimace costumes pop up, not only at Citi Field, but at away games. This thing took on a life of its own where it was so ridiculous. I had Jets fans tweeting at me and DMing me saying, how do we get Grimace to MetLife? And I said, you can't have him. Like, until the Mets are done. The only problem is it's looking like the Mets and Jets might have been done the same night. So it might be too late for Green Grimace to come out and save us. But I really enjoyed every bit of Grimace. All right, another one here. We know we've talked about Lindor to the point of, obviously we both agree Lindor was the Mets MVP, right? If you're going to hand out an MVP to this team, it's Lindor every single time. So our producer Jeff came up with a good phrase: is the MVP's VP, the vice president to the MVP, Lindor's running mate in 2024, Joe. Who is it? And I think this is one of those ones where there's probably like 6 different players you can make a truthful argument to fall in this category.
The assistant to the MVP, some may say. I will go with Sean Manaea. I think when we went into the 2024 season, truly the biggest question mark with the team was, and I think we said like verbatim, it was the starting pitching just needs to not crater the season.
Yeah.
We didn't expect it to be great. We expected if you could find a way to be league average and just keep the season afloat, the team will be okay. And when Kodai Senga goes down with the injury during spring training, that knocks him out until July, and then he comes back for 5 innings and then he goes down again. The Mets were lacking their ace. And when they needed somebody to step up, Sean Manaea was the guy that stepped up. Sure, early in the season, he had his struggles where he lost command and he sometimes didn't go deep into outings. But then when he dropped that arm angle down, the switch really flipped and he became the ace that the Mets needed. And he took the ball every single time out. As I mentioned, just a few minutes ago, went up to 200 innings pitched this year, which he's never done in his career, and 80 innings more than he did in 2023. The Mets are simply not a playoff team if Sean Manaea was not on their roster. So I will give him the MVPVP, and there are other candidates, and I'm sure you have a good one to talk about.
I love the Manaea pick. Manaea was not only phenomenal on the mound this year, but an elite vibes player and leader for this team. I think he was truly one of the glue guys of the clubhouse. I think guys looked at Manaea and there was a respect level that is as high as I've seen it in a while. I know they felt that way about Scherzer for a while, but the difference of this pitching staff is I think they looked at each other all as equals. And I don't know if I ever felt that way of the Mets' previous great pitching staffs. I don't mean that as an insult. There's a reason Max Scherzer is who he is, and Jacob deGrom, and on it went. I thought this staff cheered for one another and uplifted one another, and nobody was ever too high, and nobody ever got too low, and that's because of them. And I think the guy at the forefront of that is Manaea, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. So I like that pick a lot. I'm obviously going to go with Mark Vientos. We were joking before the show, like, obviously, one of us is going to take Vientos, and we both feel like he's worthy of being the MVP VP. What story do we even need to start with here with Mark Vientos, right? Joe, credit to you going back to before spring training. You were like, let's give Vientos a real run here and see what he could do. And we both liked the JD Martinez signing. It was easy to evaluate them in a vacuum. But with that came disappointment that Vientos wasn't going to get a real shot. And these things often find a way to work themselves out. And for Vientos, it did. He came up, he played 111 regular season games, and he never looked back. He hit 27 home runs. He was obviously on a pace for well over 30 during a full season. He had an OPS of 837, and that alone was enough to be an amazing story and one of the best stories of this Mets season. And then Mark Vientos goes into the postseason, and he's out of his mind. I mean, he has an OPS of about 1,000. It was 998 to be exact. He hit 5 home runs in 13 games. He drove in 14 runs in those 13 games. He was remarkable. He got on base at a 362 percentage, slugged 636, and he hit home runs in the biggest moments, it felt like, all the time to spark the offense. And it felt like Lindor and Pete would often find ways to save the season. It felt like Vientos did some of that, but Vientos was kind of the starter of a lot of games where the Mets need to come out of the gate and score some damn runs. And Mark Vientos would help them do that. And I thought his attitude amongst it all for a 24-year-old that has honestly, I thought has not been given a fair shake over the years all the time. His attitude's unbelievable. He just put his head down. He continued to work in Syracuse. He came to the big league club. He wasn't a butcher at third base. And the whole story of it was, I don't know if we could put him out there at third base. Well, first base is blocked. DH is blocked. He was fine at third. He's never going to be a Gold Glove player, but he didn't kill you all the time. So Vientos is my MVP VP, and man, he's right at the top of the list of reasons of why we're optimistic for the future.
When we were heading to spring training and we were down in Port St. Lucie and we did the show before the first game and everything, you couldn't have told me that Mark Vientos would prove to be this level of a contributor. I thought he was going to participate. I thought, he was the backup option to Brett Beatty, and JD Martinez had a history of back issues. So if he were to go on the IL for an extended period of time, Mark Vientos would get a chance. And it is truly, and I've said this a couple times on the show, and so forgive me, everyone who listens to every single show, if I'm going to repeat it, but I'm sure you'll appreciate it. This is a guy, you just go back over the last couple of years, we go through this timeline. 2022, didn't get an opportunity when we and a lot of people were calling for it in June to avoid trading for DHs at the deadline. Daniel Vogelback and Darren Ruff happened. Obviously, that didn't pan out. 2023, never could get a real opportunity. Whether that was, the coaching staff not being a fan, whatever the case may be, he didn't get an opportunity in 2023. And it seemed when David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza came in, it was a clean slate, fresh start for Mark Vientos. And, in talking to him down in Port St. Lucie, he told me essentially as such. He was just like, I'm ready. I'm just excited that I'm finally getting an opportunity. And then a couple of weeks later, they signed JD Martinez, and there goes the opportunity again. It would have been so easy for this man to just be like, forget this team. I mean, right. I have no choice but to go to Syracuse and play, but forget them. I want out of here. Like, he could have easily made a bit of a stink if he really wanted to. But as you said, Connor, he put his head down, he grinded, and, Brett Beatty didn't pan out at third base this year. Mark Vientos comes up and never looks back. And now when you look ahead, Mark Vientos is an established member of this team. And now as we transition into the off-season shows after this episode, the conversation surrounding Mark Vientos is not, does he have a role with this team? It's where is his role with this team? Is he a first baseman if Pete leaves? Is he still the third baseman? Is he a DH? Like, the reality is Mark Vientos has established himself as a core member of this team heading forward. And to your point, a good reason why Mets fans, I think, are optimistic right now.
And what's so incredible about Vientos' season is that the consistency. 917 OPS in May, 888 in June, 884 in July, 808 in August. Okay, he dipped down to 708 in September, and then he went nuclear in the postseason, almost 1,000. So for a 24-year-old to not go in a month or 2-month slump, it's a remarkable accomplishment. And once again, just an incredible year. Just a reminder here, we're going to do our full offseason preview next week. I don't want that to get lost. Joe and I have a lot of ideas and a lot of things we're excited about. This is a good time to recap. And you're listening to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, where you can watch every episode or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Joe, let's get ready to laugh. And everybody, you could laugh along with us. We're going to recap our 2024 predictions. There's a couple decent ones in here. There's also some that it's almost hard to believe how far removed we are from when we recorded that show. Biggest surprise. Joe went with Brett Beatty. I went with Jorge Lopez. I'm not even lying. I actually really went with Jorge Lopez. And man,
it was a surprise.
There was some levels to this pick. Lopez, to be a little fair, was pretty good when he was pitching for the Mets until he wasn't. He had a 3.76 ERA in 28 appearances. I mean, they got him really for pennies on the dollar in terms of the contract he signed. He was a big part of this bullpen. And then the biggest surprise of it all was he threw his glove into the stands and had an absolute meltdown. The Mets cut him, and they were basically the best team in baseball since then. So, yeah, it was safe to say he was definitely one of the surprises of the season.
Yes, he qualifies as a surprise, and that I think that's fair. What's fair to say is I think that moment really is important because that was, I think, the culture shift, right? Within the confines of this front office and this coaching staff, they're not putting up with the nonsense like that.
Yeah.
If you're going to act that way, you're going to find your way out of here. In previous regimes, it probably is the next day he comes in and he goes, I'm sorry, I overreacted. And then you just truck on and he just stays in the bullpen. This set a standard for the Mets going forward. And we could kind of half laugh about it now, but I think this set a standard for the Mets going forward that they're looking for the right kind of people, not just really good baseball players. And, not that I don't think Jorge Lopez was a bad person by any means. So I'm certainly not trying to say that, but within that moment and, the comments taken or taken out of context, whatever, after the game, this is just a different time for the Mets. So, definitely a surprise, but a surprise in an interesting way. And I'll tell you, for a little bit there, I was feeling good about my Brett Beatty pick. He got off to a pretty hot start. He was hitting kind of at the beginning of the season there. Then it really, started pounding the ball into the ground, and things just went down from there. And Mark Vientos never looked back. But yeah, we gave it a shot.
A couple more here. Who has more wins, Kodai Senga or Luis Severino? I believe when we did this, Senga was healthy, I want to say.
So if it was our season preview, don't we do that right before the season started?
But, the timeline was much different.
The timeline was like by Memorial Day, wasn't it?
Yes.
Or something like that?
It was Memorial Day, and you had to realize coming in, if I was a bookmaker, Severino's over-under starts made would be around 18. So when we made this prediction, the reason why we set it even was we thought they both could easily make the same amount of starts. Fortunately, Joe, we did say Severino would have more wins than Senga. Severino had 11 wins. Senga obviously only had one. That one, we had unfortunate injury luck on our side, but we were right about that. Pete Alonso home runs, over-under was at 44. We both took the over. Pete only hit 34. I think that was one of the bigger surprises, is that Pete didn't get to 40 regular season home runs. Francisco Alvarez home runs was set at over-under 31. We both took the under on that. Alvarez only hit 11. Joe and I expected him to hit more than 11 home runs. We just didn't expect him to get to the 30s. So we got that one. What month does Drew Gilbert make his major league debut? He didn't because he got hurt. Joe, you said July. I said June. And once again, he would have been here at some point if he didn't get hurt. What month does Christian Scott make his major league debut? He actually made it the first week of May, even though, Joe, you said June. I said July. He was up here a lot earlier than we expected. What month does Mike Vassell make his major league debut? He didn't. Joe, you said July. I said June. Do the Mets draft a pitcher with their first pick in this year's draft? We both said no, and they didn't.
So Carson Bench.
You were on very early. I mean, I said no because you'd just been telling me for the longest time, like they're on college bats. So if you say it, there's a good chance it's right with the draft, and they took a college bat. And then we had Jim Callis on, and he said they're taking a college bat. So
just reaffirmed. Reaffirmation's a good thing.
Yes, exactly. Pick one to happen. This is a doozy. And to be fair, none of them did. A Joey Wendell grand slam, a Francisco Alvarez cycle, a no-hitter, a steal of home, or someone on the team to hit an inside-the-park home run. None of those happened. Joe, you said inside-the-park home run. I said steal of home. You know what? We kind of get half a point here because the other ones are so egregious. Joey Wendell was on the team for 10 days. Francisco Alvarez, I mean, okay, him hitting a triple is tough to do, so the odds of getting
he had one or two this year, didn't he?
But what are the odds in that game? He also hits a home run, a double, and a single.
No,
it's different if you said like when Jose Reyes used to be able to get potentially could be in odds to get a cycle. A no hitter obviously is really tough to do. I don't know. We could have picked worse. Mets over under 84 wins. And what's your number? So they won 89 games. Joe, you were close. You went over and said 86. You were really close. You were only 3 off. I said under. They only win 80. I was pretty far off. Do they make the playoffs? If so, division winner or wild card? If wild card, which one? Joe, you nailed this. They were wild card 3, and that's exactly what you predicted. That was a great call. I didn't think they'd make the playoffs. As I've said many times, I didn't think they'd have the pitching to do it, and they did. Shout out to the Mets. So great job. That's a great last one for you, Joe. You nailed it. Wild card 3 for our preseason predictions. Those are a lot of fun. It makes me, I want to sit here and tell you like, oh, I'm going to get it more right next year, but there's too many variables in baseball.
I
don't know when Mike Vassell's coming up.
We're not going to get it more right next year, but hopefully we provide equally as entertaining answers. The only thing I'll hope is that I'm right about playoff and win total and things
that's
like
what matters
that.
The most.
Yeah, that's what matters. So I was glad to be on the right side of things there. And they say a broken clock is right twice a day.
What I'm really wondering is, so when we went down to spring training and we went out to dinner as with everybody from SNY, we were playing a game of how many saves will Edwin Diaz have was one of the questions. There was a couple of questions we were throwing around. And I remember I picked such a random number.
You picked like an egregiously low number, I felt, and I think
but guess what?
You were still over.
I was. I'm pretty sure I picked 26, and Diaz had 20 saves, and you were killing me.
You should have seen you all should have seen the look I gave Connor.
You want to strangle me at dinner.
26. They're going to win 80. I say they're going to win 86 games. How is the closer saving 27? What the heck's going to happen here?
Your exact question to me is, how the hell are they winning these games? And I said, I don't know. Things can happen. It was an absolutely ridiculous selection that had no rhyme or reason to it, just so I could be different from everyone else. And he went way under. He went 20. So, I mean, that's what happens when you miss some time and the weird suspension and all that stuff. So, all right, we'll close out the show with some mailbag questions today. Just a reminder, we keep sending your off-season questions because we could stockpile them. We love them. We are going to literally answer them starting next week for months. But today, I'm going to do my best to steer away from some of the big picture ones, like, will they get Soto and will Manaea be back and things like that. So we're going to try to do a couple different things here, Joe, and we'll start with this one from Chris Lorenz. Where would you expect Senga's output to be? And I like this question from Chris because I think it's a prerequisite for the offseason, where it's like, these are the things we need, but with what we have, how do we plan with what we have? So he said, where would you expect Senga's output to be? Assuming he'll be on an innings count, would it make sense to have him go 4 innings pitched to start with Buto for 4 innings pitched after, as well to start the season, so Buto is stretched out in the majors when we eventually need another starter? It's an interesting plan, Joe. I don't know if they'll have the amount of starting pitchers where they have that luxury, but what do you think of the whole topic of Senga next year?
It's going to be very interesting to see how they evaluate. I think there may be some innings. There'll be innings monitoring probably with Kodai Senga into 2025, but in my opinion, Jose Buto needs to be back as a starting pitcher. He performed admirably out of the bullpen. He was a huge part in the Mets getting to where they did. But it got to the point that this is a guy that it didn't matter if he threw 15 pitches or 40 pitches. He needed 2 to 3 days off before he could even pitch again. And that's not a sustainable thing to have in the bullpen for the full season. I think he needs to be back stretched out, back as a starter. The Mets are certainly going to need the starting pitching depth looking ahead. Certainly there's a bunch of free agents and they have decisions to make on other arms. But on the topic of Senga, it's hard to say what you truly expect from him. I mean, he was fantastic here his rookie season. Second season, marred by injury. And not only marred by injury, we learned a lot about Kodai Senga this year. And some people take this as a negative towards him. I think it's just the way he's wired he's very particular about his mechanics, and he is not the type of pitcher, and he's not a Max Scherzer or a Jacob deGrom that's going to tough through things. And some may look at that as a negative. That's just the way he is. If something's slightly off, he's going to shut it down. That's just the way Kodai Senga is, or showing that he is. So what do you expect? I don't know, but he's going to be a part of this rotation one way or another. And maybe this is something as we look ahead, and trust me, I've seen everyone on Twitter saying how badly they need an ace and all that. And we'll have those discussions, but I think it's hard to look ahead and say Kodai Senga is the ace of this Mets staff in 2025.
I agree with you. Here's the reality that a lot of people don't want to revisit. Kodai Senga got a 5-year, $75 million deal because health was largely the risk with him. He had all the talent and stuff in the world, and I think he's a very competitive, great clubhouse guy. You got a discount, and let's be real, starting pitching, anything under $100 million for a starting pitcher on the free agent market is just what we consider value shopping these days. It's just an insane market. Senga got that contract because of the health concerns and worked out great for the Mets year 1. Absolutely killed the Mets year 2. And we'll see how it goes in year 3. But I'm with you, Joe, and I'll sneak in a little bit of news here so people don't think we overlooked it. Paul Blackburn, one of their trade deadline acquisitions, kind of more somebody you'd pencil in as a number 4 or 5 for next year. He underwent cerebrospinal fluid leak repair this week. So he's going to miss 4 to 5 months. That would set him up to be back about halfway through spring training.
Yeah.
I know that we always say it sounds a lot worse than it is, but
right.
The reality is Blackburn is not written in ink into this
No,
rotation as he makes his way back. So
no, not written in ink. And just for reference, arbitration eligible this offseason for last year. So the Mets have him under control for one more year. MLB Trade Rumors does a fantastic job with the arbitration estimates, and they estimate Blackburn at $4.4 million. So unless the Mets think he's not going to bounce back from this, I imagine he will get tendered. And, maybe it's one of those situations he starts the season on the injured list while he builds up his pitch counts and eventually makes his way, because we know you need a ton of starting pitching to get through a season.
All right, this one from John Katamari. What's your favorite little moment from this season? Not a walk-off, not from the postseason, but something relatively small but impactful, something that still sticks with you. It's tricky, right?
It's interesting because your head just goes to all the big moments, because there was 100 big moments. I want to let you go first. Do you have one? Trying to think of something little.
I know it is pretty hard because right away my head went to it's not a huge moment because it was the regular season, but Alvarez's walk-off against the Orioles, that's a big moment. It's a walk-off. So it's pretty tricky.
Winkers when he slammed the helmet, that's
a walk-off.
In a way, those are kind of,
to me, I know once again maybe this doesn't meet the criteria of what they were hoping for, but Severino's complete game. I thought, because I think emotionally that meant so much to Severino. When the game was over, he was just a wild man on the mound. And it's we enjoyed this as a Met fan, but Luis Severino has had a long road to get here. And he's somewhere the Mets, he put himself in that position to pitch that complete game, but he always credits the Mets as an organization for keeping him healthy this year. And I think that moment, why I consider it, because it's a regular season game, non-walk-off regular season game, is a small moment to me in baseball because there's so many freaking games. So that's why I count that as a small moment. I think it was a signal to the Mets being an organization that are going to get the most out of pitchers at the best value.
And in that moment, Carlos Mendoza, people may forget, he went to go get Severino out of the game,
right?
Essentially. And Severino talked his way into staying into the game and was able to complete the job. And that's when we talk so much on this show about the analytics staff and how much money the Mets are pouring into sports science and all these kind of new age tech and everything associated with that. At its core, Carlos Mendoza he's a baseball man. And he went out to the mound, and I hate to use the word gut feel, but because it's sort of demeaning to me, but in his gut, he knew, I need to let Severino try to finish this thing. And he was able to do that. So I think that's a really, really good one.
I know yours before you even know yours.
Okay.
Your favorite small moment of the season is Jake Diekman striking out Aaron Judge.
I was very close to behind home plate, interestingly enough, for that game. And I was with one of my friends who's a big Yankees fan. And I looked at him, I go, well, I don't think this one's going to be going my way. And I'll tell you, you know this, and our producer Jeff knows this. I kind of defended Jake Diekman.
That's why. You always did.
Yeah, when frankly maybe I shouldn't have, but I defended Diekman because I saw the stuff, and him being able to come through in that moment, that is a great one. And I happened to be in the stadium for that just shows, Connor, how much happened this season.
Right.
I'll tell you, Mets Yearbook is a fantastic show on SNY. Yes. SNY does so much great content, and Mets Yearbook is one of my favorites. Whenever it's on, I try to watch it. I wish everyone at SNY the best luck in making a 1-hour special about the 2024 Mets. This feels like it needs to be like a 5-part documentary.
It's so true. It's ridiculous, the moments you forget. How about this one from Roback 516? Who is the most underrated player that didn't finish the season with the Mets?
Underrated player that didn't finish. I got this one.
Okay, thank you.
Where would the Mets? What do you think would have been different if the Mets had Dedniel Nunez in their bullpen?
Man, you nailed that one. It's not even close. He is far and away the answer to this question.
It's him, maybe Brooks Raley, but he got hurt kind of early.
He got hurt too early. The Mets stunk when he got hurt.
It's Dedniel Nunez when the Mets badly needed somebody to be the setup man to Edwin Diaz before they could get Phil Maton in the door, before they could get Ryan Stanek in the door. Dedniel Nunez unexpectedly got called up and just kind of gradually worked his way up the totem pole. He came in, he was pitching just, middle of the game, and this stuff's pretty good. He's getting these guys out. Let's try him in the 7th and then try him in the 8th. He ended up being a reliable setup man, and I think the Mets, I'm not saying Dedniel Nunez would have been the difference between winning the NLCS and not, but could have made quite a bit of difference instead of, poor Phil Maton, who had a great second half, but he just didn't have it in the postseason. So I'll go Nunez.
It's a great answer. Nunez in 25 games had a 2.31 ERA and struck out 12.3 over 9. He was one of the best relievers in baseball when he was with the Mets. And you look at losing both him and Raley at separate times of the year. Raley only pitched 8 games this year, but Raley didn't allow a run in those 8 games. And the Mets problem
never replaced him.
Never had the lefty. And Raley was kind of the beauty of, not only is he a lefty, he's a lefty that could legitimately be a setup man. I felt like the Mets never had both of those things since they lost him. Nunez was the guy, actually. He was the setup man at one point. When I say setup man, I use that phrase very loosely now because I don't think it's 8th inning guy. I think setup man is who is the reliever that gets you through the highest leverage point of the game before the closer. That could be the 6th inning. That could be the 7th inning. That could be the 8th inning. So losing Raley and Nunez, the Mets, you're right, Joe. Stanek filled the void a couple times when it really mattered, but he wasn't brought here to do that.
Right. Yeah, I think those are 2 answers, and the bullpen is one of the areas that they ran out of gas. So Nunez, Raley, if they were able to have those 2 guys, I think that maybe would have made a difference.
Nunez, in theory, should be ready for spring, right?
Yeah. He didn't get Tommy John surgery or anything. So as far as I know, Nunez should be good to go for spring training.
Obviously, Raley will not be. He was a Tommy John.
Yeah, he's probably going to miss all of next season, or he'll be back at the very, very tail end. Him and Drew Smith both are free agents, but under the same kind of timelines where they probably won't be back until late season, if at all.
All right, let's do one more quick one here. This one from T. Carey. Is there any concern about the Lindor back injury or Nimmo plantar fasciitis injuries heading into next season? My quick take on this one is not with Lindor. Lindor nothing popped up in the MRI that was structural, and Lindor was pretty awesome during the playoffs, probably dealing with a bad back. Hopefully he has the time to get right. It felt like a tweak with Lindor. And
yes,
if you've never had a back injury, like back injuries are weird because a tweak to the back, while not considered major, or you don't need surgery or anything, it can completely derail anything you do. You just need to give it time. I'm not going to lie, Joe. I'm a little concerned about Nimmo long-term, and this is going to be a longer conversation for the offseason, and Nimmo's a warrior. I expect Nimmo to play through a lot of stuff. I think our fear with Nimmo when he plays every day in the outfield is that his body breaks down. And credit to Nimmo, he got through basically the whole year without that happening. But man, he was on one leg in the offseason, and lower body injuries, especially foot-related injuries, are very, very scary.
So Lindor, I would say the concern level is low. If this back tweak happened in June, I don't think it would be so much of a conversation. The timing of it is what really made it feel a little more extreme, right? It was right at the end of the season, and he missed kind of important games. But as he separated from the time that he missed, he just at some point just started looking normal. And maybe he had to do some extra stretching and some extra things to get ready. And you never know when a back may flare up again. But everything I saw from Francisco Lindor, kind of once you get a few days removed from when he returned to the lineup, he just looked like himself. He was running, he was diving. Guys were picking him up in celebrations, and I was like, please don't do that. You could hurt his back. But I'm not too concerned there. And to be honest, my concern isn't overly high on Nimmo. I think your general point of, him being on his feet and just wearing down maybe a general concern of Brandon Nimmo's, but take it from a premium athlete myself who has had plantar fasciitis before. It sucks really, really badly. but it's something that just eventually goes away.
It does, yes.
Yeah, it's not so much of a reoccurring thing, but I can't imagine what he was feeling trying to play those baseball games, because I was just walking around and writhing in foot pain. And when I went to the foot doctor, he was just like, yeah, you have a minor case of plantar fasciitis. I went, man, I don't want to know what a major case of this is if this is minor. But he went through a lot. I think ultimately it's not something that you should expect to reoccur. But he had said that after the season, he will go into a walking boot and kind of get the weight off his foot and let that heal. Not too concerned, but you definitely have to keep an eye as Brandon Nimmo, as this contract goes on and he gets into his 30s, you're definitely have to be monitoring, his general health playing in the outfield every day.
Yeah, I think so too. And maybe the key to that is get him off his feet a couple days, whether it's DHing, give him more days off. The Mets are going to be, let's be fair to the Mets, and especially Nimmo here, who's, obviously one of our favorite players. They've been playing playoff baseball for almost half a year, Joe. That's the problem. The Mets, from a structure standpoint next year, we think will be good enough that, hey, it's June day game after a night game. Let's give Brandon Nimmo a rest. Let's give guys rest because we're building towards the stretch run. We're not in desperation mode right out of the beginning of summer. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And, of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. Next week, we'll be back. We're going to have a lot of off-season previews, combos, ideas. Stick with us all off-season, Mets fans. Thank you so much. Talk to you next week.